There are confessions that make headlines. There are confessions that fracture families. And then there are confessions that shake the foundations of a nation, echoing through history like a bell that can never be unrung. This story begins with one sentence. One chilling sentence whispered behind closed doors by the one woman the world never expected to utter anything like it. I hired him to end Princess Diana's life. Ask yourself this. Why would anyone speak those words after nearly 3 decades of silence? Why now? And why her? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, the public has speculated about Diana's tragic death, picking apart every detail of that night in Paris, searching for answers buried beneath official reports and royal silence. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared anyone for this. Not the historians. Not the journalists. Not even those closest to the crown. It didn't leak through a tabloid. It didn't come from a disgruntled ex-staffer. It came, allegedly, from Queen Camilla herself. Imagine the room. Picture the moment. A woman who fought for decades to reshape her public image, to overcome the storms of scandal and resentment, now sitting with tears gathering in the corners of her eyes, voice trembling, as if she were finally releasing a secret she had carried like chains around her chest. She wasn't being dramatic. She wasn't rehearsed. She wasn't even asked a hard question. She simply broke. That is the moment this entire story hinges on. But the real question is not what she said. It's why she said it. You might think you know the royal family. You might think you've heard every rumor, every conspiracy theory, every bitter whisper from palace hallways. Yet this confession forces us to ask a new set of questions. Did Camilla live her life knowing she had played a role in Diana's demise? Did guilt eat at her until she could no longer hide it? Or was she manipulated into saying something she didn't fully mean? And perhaps the biggest question of all, who is the him she claims to have hired? That single pronoun exploded like a grenade. Him. No name. No rank. No title. Nothing but a shadow. A faceless man hidden in plain sight somewhere in the web of Diana's final days. A man whose existence has been erased, rewritten, or maybe simply ignored, until now. Before we dive into the twists of this story, you need to understand something important. Camilla did not confess to the world. She did not issue a press statement or grant a formal interview. The confession came during a private conversation that was never meant to be heard beyond the walls of a single room. But it was heard. It was recorded. It was leaked. And the ripple effects have been relentless ever since. Why would she speak so openly when she had spent a lifetime avoiding topics that threatened the fragile acceptance she finally gained? Why reveal something so explosive at a time when the monarchy is already under intense pressure and scrutiny? These are not coincidences. This is a story about timing. A story about a secret that could not remain buried any longer. But let's slow down for a moment. Because the true depth of this confession can only be understood by revisiting the past. The years of rivalry, betrayal, love, resentment, heartbreak, and turmoil that defined the relationship between Princess Diana and Camilla Parker Bowles. What did Camilla truly feel for Diana? Was it jealousy? Fear? A quiet acknowledgement that Diana's existence blocked the one life Camilla always wanted? These emotional undercurrents matter because when a confession like this emerges, the motives behind it are everything. People remember Diana as the people's princess, a woman with unmatched warmth, grace, and humanity. But behind that grace was pain. Behind her smile was a marriage unraveling from the moment it began, overshadowed by a woman who lingered in the background like a ghost that refused to leave. For years, Diana fought a war with weapons she never chose. She fought tabloids. She fought the monarchy. She fought loneliness. She fought the quiet force that was Camilla. And the world watched every moment of that struggle. Camilla watched too. And for some reason, decades later, she decided to confess something that could tear open old wounds with a force no one saw coming. But here's what makes this moment even more unsettling. This confession wasn't the first one. It was the only one that slipped out, but not the only one Camilla allegedly tried to give. There were earlier attempts. Earlier moments when she almost spoke up but held back, silenced by people more powerful than she was. People who threatened her future, her title, her relationship, her image. That detail alone changes everything. Because it means this wasn't a sudden guilt. It was an old guilt resurfacing after being pushed down again and again. But let's return to the present, because this is where the story takes its sharpest turn. When the confession leaked, the monarchy went into emergency mode. Meetings were held. Statements were drafted and then discarded. Phones were confiscated. Advisors panicked. And somewhere inside the palace, a man whispered something that sent shivers down the spine of everyone who heard it. The envelope. Bring the envelope. Yes, the envelope. A sealed envelope that disappeared decades ago. An envelope believed to contain a name, a location, and a timeline linked directly to Diana's death. It shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be found. But it resurfaced at the worst possible moment. Or perhaps the best. So we have a confession. A mysterious man. A resurfaced envelope. And a monarchy fighting to contain everything before the truth slips out of their control. But this leads us to an even bigger question. What does this confession mean for the legacy of Princess Diana? For the integrity of the crown? And most importantly, for the people who loved her? This story matters because it challenges everything we thought we knew about the most documented tragedy of the last century. It forces us to confront uncomfortable possibilities. It reignites old suspicions that never truly died. And it makes us wonder whether Diana's final night in Paris was really as straightforward as the official narrative claimed it to be. But this introduction isn't about proving or disproving anything. It's about opening the door. It's about preparing you for a story that will take you from the private chambers of the palace to the dark corridors of conspiracy, from the emotional weight of guilt to the cold logic of power. And it will ask you to consider one haunting question. If Camilla truly confessed to arranging Diana's death, what else was hidden from the world? Breathe for a moment, because this is just the beginning. Over the next hour, you will hear details that twist your assumptions, challenge your beliefs, and push you deeper into a maze of secrets that span continents, institutions, and decades. And as the pieces of this puzzle come together, the picture that emerges is not one of simplicity. It is one of shadows. Now pause and imagine this. Camilla finishing her confession, silence filling the room like smoke, and her final words barely audible. I couldn't carry it anymore. Why couldn't she carry it anymore? What changed? Who confronted her? What resurfaced that made silence impossible? These questions are not rhetorical. They are the keys to everything that follows. So take a breath, settle in, and brace yourself. The moment came suddenly. 1 second, the room was quiet. The next, the words dropped like a bombshell, shattering everything anyone thought they knew about the royal family. I hired him to end Princess Diana's life. Imagine hearing that. Imagine the weight of such a sentence. Not whispered in gossip, not leaked through a journalist, not printed in a tabloid, no. Spoken by Camilla Parker Bowles herself, the woman who had long been the shadow at the edge of Diana's life. The woman who had survived decades of public resentment, ridicule, and rumor. And now, she was confessing. But to whom? And why now? You might be asking yourself the same question I did. Who was listening? Who bore witness to the confession? Was it a trusted advisor? A family member? Or a journalist embedded deep within the palace walls? That answer is both fascinating and terrifying, because the person hearing it didn't record it for fame or money. They recorded it because they sensed something extraordinary was about to happen, a moment that could change everything. And it did. Camilla's tone was quiet at first, controlled, almost fragile. But as the confession spilled from her lips, the tremor in her voice betrayed a long-suppressed storm of guilt, fear, and, perhaps, relief. You see, this wasn't a casual remark. It wasn't a joke, a sarcastic aside, or an attempt to shock. She spoke with the weight of decades pressing down on her shoulders, and for the first time, the world might get a glimpse of the private Camilla, beyond the polished public image, beyond the elegant gowns, beyond the carefully curated smile. This was human, vulnerable, and dangerous. Why now? Why break a silence that had lasted nearly 3 decades? There are many theories. Some say it was the fear of exposure. Others suggest it was a moment of emotional breakdown, finally unable to bear the burden of the secret any longer. And some speculate darker possibilities, that she was maneuvered into confession by someone who wanted leverage over her, someone who knew she had carried a shadow far too heavy to escape. But one thing is certain. The timing wasn't random. Camilla didn't speak lightly, and she didn't choose this moment by accident. For years, the public had painted Camilla in broad strokes. The other woman, the interloper, the one who contributed to the unraveling of a fairy tale marriage. But inside those walls, away from public view, she lived with memories, decisions, and actions that no headline could capture. Her life was a study in restraint, manipulation, and survival. And in that brief, shattering moment, the restraint crumbled. She spoke a truth that had been buried, hidden, and protected by fear, power, and secrecy. A truth that the world may never have been ready to hear. But let's pause for a second. What about Diana? What about her memory? The princess who captivated the world, whose tragedy still resonates decades later. Camilla's alleged confession directly implicates herself in a story that has haunted the British public for generations. Every detail about Diana's final years, every whisper of tension, every reported glance and confrontation, suddenly carries a new weight. And that weight is unbearable, because it forces a confrontation not just with Camilla's morality, but with the entire institution that surrounded her. How do you reconcile a confession like this with decades of careful image management, philanthropic endeavors, and public appearances? The person who heard the confession described the moment as surreal. Camilla didn't scream. She didn't fall to her knees. She simply stated it, as if stating it aloud might somehow release her from the torment of years. And yet, there was no relief in the room. Only tension, silence, and the heavy sense that the world was about to shift beneath its feet. Questions flooded the listener's mind. Who was the him Camilla referred to? Was this person still alive? Was Diana's death really orchestrated, or was this a confession born out of remorse, exaggeration, or mental pressure? The questions were endless, and the answers were shrouded in shadows. What makes this confession even more compelling is the psychological complexity behind it. Camilla has been portrayed as calculating, strategic, and poised. Yet here, in a single, devastating sentence, she revealed vulnerability and guilt. And that's what makes the audience lean in. That's what keeps people watching, reading, thinking. Because the confession is both shocking and human. It exposes contradictions. It challenges preconceptions. And it forces the public to ask uncomfortable questions about morality, power, and the consequences of secrecy. You have to consider the environment in which this confession occurred. It wasn't a staged event. It wasn't a press conference designed for maximum drama. It happened behind closed doors, in a space meant to shield the royal from public scrutiny. And yet, somehow, the details leaked. A recording, a transcript, or perhaps an eyewitness account made its way to someone who realized the gravity of what had been said. And once it was out, there was no putting it back. No apology. No retraction. Only the shockwaves traveling through the royal corridors, the press rooms, and the minds of millions around the world. Camilla's life has been defined by her relationship with both Prince Charles and Princess Diana. That triangle, fraught with tension, jealousy, and unspoken animosity, has dominated headlines for decades. But the confession reframes everything. It doesn't just add to the narrative of rivalry. It rewrites the story entirely. It adds a layer of darkness, a suggestion that forces us to question every previous understanding of Diana's final years. What if the public narrative of innocence, tragedy, and circumstance was only part of the story? What if another layer exists? One that Camilla has now, willingly or unwillingly, revealed? Think about that. The person who had been vilified, criticized, and sidelined suddenly becomes the central figure in a narrative that redefines historical events. And the public is left grappling with emotions they may not be ready to confront. Anger, disbelief, sorrow, and betrayal. What does this do to the memory of Diana? To the legacy of the monarchy? To the sense of trust that people have held for decades? Camilla's words carry consequences far beyond the walls in which they were spoken. But even as the shock settles, new questions arise. How did this confession come to be heard? Who was responsible for documenting it? Why now, of all times, does it surface publicly? And what about the man referred to as him? Is he real? Was he ever real? Or is he a symbol, a stand-in for decisions and actions that remain hidden from the public eye? Every clue opens a dozen more doors. Every answer seems to birth a new question. And that is the power of a confession like this. It keeps the audience riveted, heart racing, mind spinning, desperate to know more. You may be asking yourself, is this even believable? Could Camilla really say such a thing? Could someone so aware of public perception, so seasoned in managing scandal, really expose herself in this way? The answer is complex. Because human beings are messy. We are full of contradictions. We make mistakes. We lie. We confess. And sometimes, the weight of guilt becomes unbearable. And that is what appears to have happened here. Camilla, facing decades of scrutiny and personal conflict, chose a moment to reveal a truth she could no longer carry alone. And what about the rest of the royal family? Their reactions, their silence, their urgent conversations behind closed doors, all point to the magnitude of what has just occurred. A single confession has the power to fracture relationships, alter historical interpretation, and ignite public outrage. And as much as the world may debate the veracity of Camilla's statement, one fact is undeniable. It has already changed the conversation, forcing everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew. But here's the final thought you need to hold on to as we move into the story proper. The confession was only the beginning. It set into motion a series of events, discoveries, and revelations that would leave no royal chamber untouched. Every secret, every hidden file, every whispered conversation from the past suddenly gained new significance. And the person who listened? They realized something terrifying. The confession might be only part of a much larger story. One that had been waiting decades to be told. What if I told you that Camilla didn't just reveal this secret out of the blue? That this wasn't her first attempt to speak, but rather the culmination of decades of suppressed confessions? Imagine a life spent carrying a burden that could destroy reputations, relationships, even history itself. Imagine knowing the truth but being silenced, pushed into shadows, forced to remain quiet. That was Camilla's life for years. And only now, after decades of careful silence, does the story emerge. But it almost didn't. Back in the early 2000s, before public acceptance had softened toward her, before the media ceased its relentless vilification, Camilla allegedly tried to confess her role in the events surrounding Princess Diana. It wasn't a dramatic public statement or a recorded interview. No cameras, no journalists. It was private, intimate, perhaps meant for someone she trusted completely. She sought to release the weight she carried, to finally acknowledge the truth. But it didn't work. Someone silenced her. Someone powerful. Someone who understood the implications of her words better than she did herself. The attempt was subtle, almost invisible to outsiders. A slip of phrasing during a private dinner, a note written and left unread, a hesitant murmur in a conversation quickly redirected. The palace machinery moved with precision. Advisors intervened. Courtiers smoothed over the moments. And Camilla, for the first time, felt the sting of realization. Some truths are too dangerous to speak, even for those who bear them. Can you imagine that? Feeling the urge to confess, to finally release yourself from decades of hidden guilt, only to be stopped cold? How must that crush the soul? How must it feel to have the words on your lips, but the power structure around you insisting they remain unspoken? It's a pressure most of us cannot comprehend, yet Camilla lived it every day. Every glance at Diana's image, every mention of the tragic night in Paris, every passing headline in the newspapers, reminders of the secret she carried and the constraints placed upon her. And why was she silenced? Theories abound. Perhaps it was Prince Charles, wary of destabilizing his position and protecting the monarchy. Perhaps it was senior advisors, fearing scandal, knowing the public would never forgive, never understand. Perhaps it was fear of Diana's sons, who might see such a confession as betrayal. Whoever it was, their intervention was precise, calculated, effective. Camilla's first attempt to speak, to confess, was buried before it could take root. Yet the story doesn't end there. The suppression of her confession didn't erase it from her memory. It remained lodged in her consciousness like a splinter, nagging at her with every passing year. Every public appearance, every interaction with the royal family, every whispered media rumor, it reminded her that the secret existed and that she bore sole responsibility. And perhaps, over time, that pressure built until silence was no longer an option. We must also consider the emotional toll of such suppression. What does it do to a person to be constantly aware of a truth that could alter history, yet be forbidden to speak it? The psychological weight can be crushing. Anxiety, paranoia, guilt, and the gnawing feeling of injustice. It's a potent mix. Camilla's public persona of composure, elegance, and control may have masked the storm raging beneath, but it didn't remove it. And when decades later she finally whispered her confession, it was as though a dam had broken. Think about it from her perspective. Imagine years of careful calculation, every word weighed, every action measured, every public appearance choreographed to avoid scandal. And yet, the most significant secret of her life, the one with potential consequences beyond imagination, was trapped inside her, begging to be released. Why carry such a burden in silence? Perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of shame, perhaps because she understood that no one, not even the monarchy, could manage the fallout. Now consider this. What might have happened if Camilla had succeeded in her earlier attempt to confess? Would the monarchy have crumbled? Would history remember her differently? Or would the public have condemned her outright? These questions haunt the narrative because the stakes were unimaginably high. A confession about Diana's death, even whispered privately, has the potential to reshape decades of historical understanding and redefine every relationship connected to the tragedy. But Camilla wasn't simply silenced by authority, she was silenced by circumstance. At the time of her first attempt, Diana's death was still a raw wound. The palace had barely stabilized the narrative, and the world was still reeling from shock. Media frenzy was at its peak. Public sentiment was unpredictable. In such a climate, any admission, even a private one, could have set off an uncontrollable chain reaction. The people she trusted to hear her truth intervened. Not out of malice, necessarily, but out of calculation. And so her confession was buried, locked away by fear, strategy, and timing. Yet here's where it gets even more interesting. Despite being silenced, Camilla's suppressed confession did not disappear entirely. Some claim that fragments remained, whispered in confidence, fleetingly recorded, and indirectly acknowledged in private conversations. Advisors, family members, and confidants noticed subtle changes in her behavior. A sigh too heavy, a glance too wary, a hesitation that hinted at unsaid truths. It was a secret visible in its invisibility, a confession that lived in gestures and glances. And so, the stage was set for the eventual, full confession decades later. The first attempt, buried as it was, planted seeds, seeds of truth, seeds of consequence, seeds of guilt, that eventually could not be ignored. Camilla had already tested the waters once and been forced back into silence. That moment became a lesson in patience, strategy, and timing. Because secrets, as we all know, rarely stay buried forever. Do you ever wonder what it feels like to carry a secret so potent, so potentially explosive, that every interaction reminds you of it? Every decision, every smile, every carefully managed public event, every compliment, every scandal, every breath becomes intertwined with a truth you cannot reveal. This is the psychological reality Camilla allegedly faced for years. And it is essential to understanding the context of her eventual confession. Because when the weight of decades collides with the right, or wrong, moment, the dam breaks, and everything floods out. And here's the most chilling part. The fact that her first attempt was silenced demonstrates the stakes. It demonstrates the lengths the monarchy, or those surrounding her, would go to maintain control, protect narratives, and preserve legacy. That means Camilla's second, successful confession decades later was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was calculated, pressured, inevitable. The secret, suppressed for so long, was now poised to emerge, carrying consequences no one could fully predict. Imagine knowing your first attempt to confess would be crushed. Imagine understanding that the truth you carry could shatter lives, yet feeling the unbearable pull to finally release it. And imagine finally speaking it, knowing the world will never look at you, or at the tragedy of Diana, the same way again. That is the emotional gravity behind this chapter of the story. It explains why the confession matters, why it resonates, why it cannot be ignored. And as we move forward, remember this: Camilla's first attempt, though buried, left traces. Those traces, hints, murmurs, behaviors, and indirect admissions, set the foundation for what came next. They are the hidden threads connecting her silence to her eventual revelation. And they are a reminder that the past is never truly gone. Secrets, once born, have a way of returning. But the person who silenced her that first time, they are still out there, lurking in the shadows of this story. And the reason they intervened will come to light sooner or later. Because Camilla's second confession, the one we are now exploring, did not happen in isolation. It is part of a chain. A sequence of events, interventions, and manipulations that shaped the royal narrative for decades. Who is him? That is the question that has haunted everyone since Camilla's confession first leaked. She said the words almost casually, as if the weight of their significance was hers alone to bear. I hired him to end Princess Diana's life. But she never revealed a name, a title, a rank, or even a hint beyond the single, chilling pronoun, him. Just him. Who could that be? Was it a man of influence? A man in the shadows? Someone long erased from history? Someone deliberately scrubbed from public memory? The ambiguity is what terrifies people. Consider this. If Camilla had given a name, the story might have been contained, investigated, or dismissed. Names carry accountability. Names allow investigation. But pronouns? They carry fear. They carry mystery. They leave the imagination to run wild. And that is exactly what Camilla did. She created a vacuum. A space filled with terror, speculation, and the possibility of an untold conspiracy that could change everything we thought we knew about Diana's final days. The palace, of course, responded immediately. Advisors scrambled to determine who could possibly be the man Camilla referred to. Names were suggested, theories debated, every possibility weighed and discarded as too implausible or too explosive. How do you investigate a shadow, a faceless figure referenced only by one woman in a private conversation? And what if he was already dead? Or worse, what if he was still out there? These are not hypothetical concerns. They are questions that palace insiders, investigators, and intelligence experts alike began to wrestle with once the confession leaked. But let's take a step back. Why would Camilla even hire someone? Was it desperation? Was it jealousy, fear, or a perceived necessity? Or was it manipulation, pressure, or coercion from forces we may never fully understand? This is where the story becomes both fascinating and horrifying. Because the act of hiring someone implies premeditation. It implies intent. It implies that decisions were made consciously, strategically, and with awareness of consequences. And yet, Camilla's emotional tone suggested something more complex. Guilt, regret, and perhaps a lingering sense of fear for what might happen if the truth were ever uncovered. What is most chilling is that Camilla did not elaborate further. She didn't provide a backstory. She didn't explain the circumstances that led to her allegedly hiring this man. She simply dropped the sentence, watched it settle in the air, and let its weight do the work. And that is the genius, or perhaps the cruelty, of her confession. The human mind instinctively seeks answers. The mind asks questions that can never be fully answered. Who? Why? When? How? And in that gap, fear and speculation thrive. The identity of this him has inspired decades of rumor and investigation. Some suggest it was a palace insider, someone with access, someone who understood the inner workings of the royal household and the vulnerabilities of the individuals involved. Others speculate it was an outsider, a man whose skills, connections, or history made him capable of actions that ordinary people could never imagine. And then there are those who believe he may have been a ghost, a fabricated figure invented to absolve Camilla of certain responsibilities while simultaneously terrifying those who knew the truth. But consider this. If he was real, what happened to him? Did he survive? Was he silenced? Is he living in the shadows somewhere, aware that his actions, whatever they were, could be revealed at any moment? And if he is still alive, what does he know? These questions keep investigators awake at night, historians theorizing endlessly, and the public fascinated by the possibility of a hidden figure operating beyond reach, beyond accountability, beyond history itself. The pronoun itself, him, suggests intimacy, familiarity, and secrecy. Camilla didn't say a man or someone I hired. She said him. Personal, intentional, specific. It implies that this man was known to her, trusted, feared, or manipulated, perhaps all three. And therein lies the tension that keeps people riveted. Because in a story about deception, power, and tragedy, the human connections are often more explosive than the facts themselves. Who you know, who you trust, who you fear. And in this case, Camilla knew him. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to carry knowledge of a man who could commit an act of unspeakable consequence. Imagine keeping silent for decades, knowing he exists, knowing that he might strike again, knowing that revealing his existence could destabilize not only your life, but the entire monarchy. Camilla's psychological burden becomes more apparent with every layer we examine. And it is this burden that sets the stage for the confession we now explore in detail. We also have to consider motive. If Camilla did hire him, what drove her to make such a radical decision? Was it jealousy? Fear of Diana's growing influence and popularity? Pressure from others within the royal sphere? Or was it the culmination of years of complex interpersonal dynamics that pushed her to a breaking point? The truth may never be fully known, but the impact of even a hint of involvement is devastating, because it forces us to reconsider not only the narrative of Diana's life and death, but also the very nature of power, loyalty, and secrecy within the royal family. Let's pause and ask a question. If you were living with such a secret, would you confess after decades? Could you bear the weight of knowing that one word, one action, could destroy lives? Could you speak it aloud, knowing that the consequences might never be reversible? Camilla did. And that is why the story resonates. It is human, it is terrifying, and it is completely unfiltered. The palace's response, when the confession first surfaced, was immediate and calculated. Names were crossed off lists. Doors were closed. Phones were confiscated. Advisors whispered warnings. No one could identify him, but everyone understood the danger of even acknowledging his existence. If Camilla's words were true, the implications were global. And yet, her tone suggested remorse, almost as if she wished the man had never existed. Or perhaps she wished she had never been forced to know him at all. Now consider this. A confession like this doesn't exist in isolation. It ripples. Every interaction Camilla had after the fact, every private conversation, every guarded glance, gains a new dimension. Everyone in proximity to the royal family now interprets past events through a different lens. Decisions, statements, even minor controversies suddenly carry hidden meanings. Was a particular decision driven by loyalty? By fear? By awareness of this mysterious him? The possibilities are endless, and they are riveting. Finally, what is most terrifying about him is the unknown. Not who he is, not what he did, but what he represents. He is a shadow, a symbol, a reminder of the reach and consequences of secrecy. A figure who may never be identified, who may never face justice, but whose existence alone reshapes history. And the audience is left to grapple with this uncertainty, to wonder, to speculate, and to feel the chilling weight of secrets too dark to fully reveal. And then, as if scripted for maximum tension, there is the envelope. A sealed envelope allegedly tied to the identity of him. A physical artifact that resurfaces decades later, potentially containing answers, or perhaps more questions. Who sent it? Who intercepted it? And what, exactly, does it contain? The mystery deepens because the envelope may be the only link to verifying Camilla's confession. And if it falls into the wrong hands, or the right ones, the consequences could be catastrophic. The mysterious man known only as him is not just a character in a story. He is a catalyst. He is the bridge between decades of secrecy and a world on the edge of revelation. And as Camilla's confession gains traction, the search for him becomes both obsession and dread. Investigators, historians, journalists, and the public are all fixated on one question. Who is he? And will the truth ever be revealed? But the truth, as always, is more complicated than any of us could imagine. Because even if him is identified, even if the envelope reveals secrets, there is no guarantee that justice or understanding will follow. The royal family, the public, and history itself are now entwined in a narrative that may never be fully untangled. And that is why the mystery of him continues to grip the imagination, haunting every revelation that follows. And as the envelope waits, sealed and untouchable for decades, the palace braces for what might be revealed. Because the man known only as him is not just a footnote. He is the hinge on which the entire story swings. And when the envelope finally resurfaces, no one will be prepared for the consequences. It appeared out of nowhere. Or at least, That's what everyone claimed. A plain, unassuming envelope, sealed tight, bearing no official insignia, no return address, no name, just a sense of impending consequence. For decades, it had been rumored, whispered about in palace corridors, dismissed as legend. Lost files, discarded memos, or rumors of a confession so explosive that no one dared to preserve it. And yet, here it was, the envelope that shouldn't exist. And inside, potentially, the proof of everything Camilla had whispered, the man known only as him, the events leading to Diana's death, the hidden truths that had eluded history for decades. Have you ever held a secret in your hands and felt the weight of it? Imagine that weight multiplied by centuries of scrutiny, by lives lost and manipulated, by a global audience desperate for answers. That was the aura surrounding this envelope. It carried the power to ignite scandal, to rewrite narratives, and to destroy reputations that had survived decades. And most chillingly, it was real. Not a metaphor, not a threat, not a rumor, but an object, tangible, sealed, and impossible to ignore. The story of the envelope begins long before it resurfaced. Some say it was prepared shortly after Diana's tragic death, created as a contingency, a record for the monarchy, a warning, a ledger of sins that could never see the light of day. Others claim it was Camilla herself who authored it, detailing her involvement, her fears, her observations, and perhaps even the identity of the man she allegedly hired. And still others suggest it was drafted by someone else entirely, a palace insider who knew too much and wanted to safeguard the truth, even as secrecy became the law of survival. The envelope's journey is almost as mysterious as its contents. For years, it disappeared from sight, hidden in locked drawers, under layers of bureaucracy, in the hands of people sworn to silence. It survived fires, relocations, resignations, and even internal purges of palace staff. Some claim it moved like a ghost, appearing briefly in private meetings, then vanishing again, almost as if it were protecting itself, waiting for the right moment. And when it finally resurfaced, it ignited panic. Because suddenly, the possibility of revelation became immediate, unavoidable, and dangerous. Why did it resurface at this exact moment? Was it coincidence? Was it deliberate? Some insiders believe it was leaked strategically to apply pressure on Camilla, to force admissions from those who had long protected secrets. Others say it was unintended, a mistake by someone who underestimated the consequences of allowing it to leave a hidden vault. Whatever the reason, its emergence changed the stakes. Suddenly, decades of silence, careful maneuvering, and palace protection were at risk. Suddenly, the past collided with the present. Inside the envelope, of course, no one knows exactly what lies. Some claim it contains a list of names, events, and dates, all tied to Diana's last months. Others suggest it holds a single document, written in Camilla's own hand, detailing her involvement and the presence of the man known only as him. There are even whispers of correspondence between advisors, intelligence personnel, or third-party operatives. Letters that could confirm or contradict the confession, adding layers of complexity to an already explosive narrative. Imagine the tension of holding such an object. What would you do? Open it? Destroy it? Hand it to someone trusted, risking exposure? Or leave it untouched, letting history decide its fate? Each option carries consequences. Opening it risks scandal. Destroying it risks obstruction of justice. Sharing it risks exposure, betrayal, and global attention. And yet, despite all these risks, someone had made the decision to preserve it, to ensure that the truth, whatever it might be, would survive, even if hidden for decades. The envelope is also symbolic. It represents everything about secrecy, power, and control in the royal context. It is a physical manifestation of decisions that were never meant to be revealed, a tangible reminder that the past is never truly gone. Even in a world dominated by media, technology, and instant communication, some secrets resist exposure, holding their power through patience, fear, and the unknown. And that is what gives the envelope its power. It is more than paper. It is leverage, history, and suspense rolled into one small, deceptively simple object. But consider this. If the envelope holds evidence of Camilla's involvement in Diana's death, what does that mean for the monarchy? For the narrative carefully cultivated for decades? For the family that has survived scandal after scandal, crisis after crisis, all while presenting a composed, polished public image? The implications are staggering. Suddenly, history, reputation, and perception are on a knife's edge, vulnerable to the revelation of a single sealed object. And that tension, that uncertainty, is what keeps audiences riveted, historians theorizing, and palace insiders awake at night. The envelope also raises personal questions about Camilla herself. What was her reaction upon its resurfacing? Did she fear exposure? Relief? Guilt? Pride? Perhaps a mixture of all of them. Because the envelope not only validates her confession but also threatens to define her legacy, cementing her role in a narrative that could dominate history books, media reports, and public opinion. It is a burden, a weapon, and a mirror, reflecting both truth and consequence. And then there is the question of the man, the elusive him, mentioned in Camilla's confession. The envelope is thought to be the key to identifying him, to unraveling his role, and potentially bringing answers to decades of speculation. But therein lies the suspense, because finding him is not just a matter of uncovering documents. It requires decoding intentions, tracing hidden networks, and interpreting motives that may have shifted over decades. And even if he is found, the human and political consequences are unimaginable. Some say the envelope contains only hints, breadcrumbs leading to larger truths hidden elsewhere. Others claim it is complete, a map of secrets, confirming or contradicting the confession in ways that will shock the world. Either way, its existence cannot be ignored. It forces the monarchy, the public, and investigators to confront realities that have been buried, silenced, or denied for years. The tension surrounding it is almost unbearable because, while it may reveal answers, it also raises more questions than anyone can answer. The envelope is also a narrative device in this real-life drama. It bridges the past and present, the confession and consequences, the known and unknown. It forces every participant, Camilla, Charles, Harry, the advisors, and even the public, to reassess their understanding of events. And that is precisely what makes this story so compelling. Because every object, every document, every whispered secret in this saga has layers. Layers that demand attention, analysis, and emotional investment. Finally, consider the anticipation. How would you feel knowing an object exists that could change everything, yet you are forbidden from opening it? That is the tension everyone in this story faces. The envelope waits. Silent. Closed. Loaded with potential consequences. Every day it remains sealed is another day the past holds sway over the present. And when it is finally opened, the world will have to reckon with the truth. But will we be ready? Will the monarchy survive the revelation? Or will decades of secrecy, manipulation, and carefully curated narratives finally unravel? And as the envelope waits, the palace braces. Advisors whisper. Security is tightened. Rumors circulate. And somewhere in the shadows, the memory of the first suppressed confession. And the mysterious man lingers. The envelope may be small, unassuming, and sealed, but it carries the weight of a nation's history. Have you ever wondered what someone sees when they are watching history unfold behind closed doors? What truths are visible only to those living in the shadow of power? For Camilla, the final weeks of Princess Diana's life were a panorama of tension, emotion, and subtle yet decisive moves. Things the public would never see, never understand, never even suspect. While the world remembered Diana in headlines, photographs, and public appearances, Camilla witnessed something else. Something quieter. Something infinitely more dangerous. The weeks before Diana's tragic death were filled with routine appearances, scheduled charity events, and a facade of normalcy. But behind the polished public life lay a turbulent undercurrent of fear, jealousy, and strategic positioning. Diana's every move was scrutinized, not just by the press, but by those within the royal inner circle. Every interaction, every gesture, every conversation carried weight. And Camilla, whether she wanted to or not, was a part of that calculus. Camilla's view of those weeks, according to insiders, was intimate and often uncomfortable. She wasn't merely a spectator. She was a participant in a complex, invisible game of power, perception, and survival. She observed Diana's growing influence, her public charisma, and her capacity to command attention in a way that threatened existing hierarchies. For some, this would have been envy. For others, admiration. For Camilla, it was complicated, emotions intertwined with guilt, fear, and self-preservation. But what did she really see? Accounts suggest that she witnessed moments of extreme vulnerability. Diana, exhausted from relentless public scrutiny, confided in aides about her fears, her loneliness, and her apprehension about the future. These were private admissions, spoken in confidence, yet Camilla was there, hearing everything. And those observations, combined with her own position in the royal triangle, gave her a perspective that the world would never fully grasp. We must also consider the psychological dimension. Imagine living with the dual awareness of your own insecurities and the public's fascination with another person's life. Imagine seeing someone who embodies charm, influence, and grace, while simultaneously knowing that the public narrative has long painted you as the antagonist. That awareness can warp perception, intensify emotion, and shape decisions in ways that are both conscious and subconscious. For Camilla, it may have been a mix of fear, calculation, and desperation. There are specific incidents from those final weeks that have become points of discussion among insiders. Private meetings where Diana confronted aides about perceived threats. Moments in which she questioned loyalty, intentions, and motives. Times when she noticed glances, overheard conversations, or sensed arrangements that seemed orchestrated without her knowledge. Camilla allegedly observed all of this. She saw both the surface performance and the subtle machinations behind it. And it was in that observation that her alleged confession gains context. Why does this matter? Because understanding what Camilla saw helps explain the psychology of her alleged decision to hire the man known only as him. It paints a picture not of cold calculation, but of layered motivations: fear, envy, insecurity, and the pressure of existing within a system that allows very little room for error or moral ambiguity. For decades, the public assumed simplicity. Good versus bad, victim versus antagonist. But reality, as Camilla allegedly knew, was infinitely more complex. Consider the following. Diana's relationships, both personal and professional, were under intense observation. Every interaction with advisors, friends, and family was noted, analyzed, and sometimes manipulated. Camilla, as part of the royal network, would have access to details invisible to outsiders. Conversations in hushed tones, late-night correspondences, and private schedules. All of it contributed to an environment thick with tension and opportunity. Could she have acted out of self-preservation? Or was it more deliberate, more strategic, more human? And yet, there are contradictions in the narrative. On one hand, Camilla is portrayed as someone who maintained distance, a carefully measured presence that avoided the spotlight and minimized exposure. On the other hand, insiders claim she was involved in subtle interventions, brief manipulations, and observational tactics that positioned her uniquely to witness events few others could. How do we reconcile these contradictions? Perhaps that is exactly what makes her confession so compelling. It is human, flawed, and impossible to simplify. During those weeks, Diana's public image remained pristine. She was photographed, filmed, and celebrated. The press adored her. The public adored her. But Camilla allegedly witnessed the private cracks, the exhaustion, the fear, the questions that Diana dared not voice publicly. And she saw how those cracks created opportunities for intervention, manipulation, or, as she later confessed, possibly more sinister actions. What does it mean to watch such vulnerability unfold while being tied to the system that could exploit it? And what moral weight does that carry? Now, consider the emotional tension of this perspective. Camilla's role was not passive. She was an insider observing the inner workings of a tragedy that would capture global attention. Every choice, every glance, every withheld word carried significance. How much did she influence events, even inadvertently? Could the knowledge she gained have pushed her toward the alleged decision to hire someone? Or was it fear, pressure, guilt, or a combination of all three? These are questions without clear answers, and yet they form the backbone of this chapter of the story. There are also the smaller, more intimate details, moments that humanize and complicate the narrative. Camilla allegedly witnessed Diana's expressions of doubt, quiet acts of defiance, and private confrontations with aides. She saw the princess laughing in public while grieving in private. She saw moments of tenderness and fear, all framed within a context of heightened surveillance and relentless pressure. And in witnessing all this, Camilla's perspective became a prism, refracting the events of those weeks into something that was deeply personal, emotionally charged, and historically significant. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of what Camilla allegedly saw is the moral ambiguity. Diana's final weeks were filled with decisions, actions, and interactions that could be interpreted in multiple ways. Every observer could claim insight, yet the truth remained elusive. Camilla's confession suggests she believed her perspective carried weight, that what she saw, understood, and acted upon mattered. And in that admission lies both horror and fascination. She positioned herself as a witness and participant in a story that would haunt generations. Now ask yourself, if you had witnessed someone's life unravel, their every step scrutinized and manipulated, would you intervene? Would you remain passive? Or would you act in ways history might judge as unforgivable? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the very dilemma Camilla allegedly faced in those final weeks. And it is this human complexity that makes the story compelling, emotionally charged, and impossible to ignore. But as those weeks drew to a close, the tension escalated. Decisions, both public and private, compounded. The environment thickened with fear, uncertainty, and anticipation. Diana's actions, the movements of the palace, and the network of insiders all converged into a narrative that was tragically poised to climax. And Camilla, caught between observation and participation, would become a central figure in what history would later remember as the final chapter of Diana's life. The details of what Camilla allegedly saw are only partially documented, shrouded in secrecy and speculation. Yet the fragments that exist paint a haunting picture. A princess striving for autonomy, a palace maintaining control, and a woman navigating guilt, opportunity, and fear. It is this tension that fuels every aspect of her later confession. And it is this same tension that will drive the next chapters of our story. And then, as the world looks back in shock, the final question emerges. What did she do with what she saw? Did she merely observe? Or did observation lead to action? Did fear, jealousy, or strategic calculation guide her choices? And most importantly, what consequences did those choices set in motion for Diana, for the monarchy, and for herself? And just when the narrative seems complete, Camilla's confession reminds us that nothing is ever simple. The past is never gone. The secrets never fully vanish. And the events of those final weeks, witnessed in private, carry ramifications that would unfold for decades. And as the night approached, as Diana moved toward her final days, the world had no idea that someone had been watching, recording, and deciding, decisions that would echo forever. The night of the crash. The world remembers it in headlines, photographs, and memorials. But what really happened? What truths lie buried beneath the flashing cameras, the official reports, and the neatly packaged narrative of tragedy? Camilla's confession forces us to revisit that night with eyes that weren't just looking. They were watching, analyzing, and witnessing in ways the public could never imagine. And what she allegedly saw, what she understood, may change everything. The official story is familiar. A car fleeing paparazzi, a tunnel in Paris, an accident, lives lost. The details are etched in public memory. Yet Camilla's perspective, informed by years of proximity to both Diana and the royal machinery, suggests there was more. Subtle movements, hidden glances, timed interactions, small details that, to the untrained eye, seemed inconsequential but carried weight for someone who knew the people, the motivations, and the stakes involved. Let's consider the timeline. Diana's evening was planned down to the minute. Meetings, dinners, and appearances fit together like pieces of a puzzle. And yet, according to insiders, there were anomalies. Unexplained stops, brief conversations with unknown individuals, shifts in the routes taken, small deviations that may seem trivial, but in the world of highly controlled movements and secretive surveillance, they are glaring red flags. And Camilla, with her access and awareness, allegedly noticed them. Ask yourself this. How often do we trust official timelines at face value? How often do we accept public explanations without considering what might have been unseen, unheard, or deliberately concealed? Camilla's position gave her a vantage point few others had. She was in the orbit of decisions, aware of schedules, capable of interpreting behavior, and perhaps, for better or worse, involved in subtle orchestration. There are accounts suggesting she observed Diana in moments of tension and vulnerability that night. The princess was reportedly uneasy, distracted, perhaps sensing the pressure mounting around her. Advisors, drivers, and security personnel were aware of her mood, and subtle interactions indicated that something unusual was in motion. Camilla allegedly saw these interactions and registered their significance. She wasn't just watching history unfold. She was watching human behavior under extreme pressure, and she knew what small missteps could lead to catastrophic consequences. Consider the car itself. A Mercedes in a Paris tunnel, chased by photographers, carrying lives that would soon be intertwined with legend. The vehicle's movements, the driver's reactions, and the reported lack of safety precautions have been dissected endlessly. Yet Camilla's alleged perspective adds another dimension. Awareness of potential orchestration, knowledge of people's positions, and understanding of the vulnerabilities inherent in that night's arrangements. To her, the crash wasn't merely an accident. It was a moment where human decisions, fears, and secrets collided with irrevocable consequences. And then there's the man known only as him. Camilla's confession suggests a presence in the background that was invisible to most, but whose existence may have shaped events in subtle, powerful ways. Was he there, watching, manipulating, or merely an instrument in a larger plan? The pronouns she used carry weight precisely because they imply intimacy with the actions, a recognition of cause and effect that outsiders can never fully grasp. Now, ask yourself, if you had observed something of this magnitude, something so charged with consequence, would you speak? Could you carry it alone? Camilla allegedly did. But the timing of her confession, decades later, raises questions. What shifted? What pressure, guilt, or revelation forced the words out after years of silence? The answers are complex, layered with emotion, power dynamics, and the simple human need to release a burden too heavy to bear alone. Even the simplest details of that night take on new significance. Photographs, security footage, eyewitness testimony, each becomes more complicated under the lens of Camilla's awareness. Every choice Diana made, every glance at her companions, every pause in conversation could be interpreted differently when we consider what Camilla allegedly witnessed. What seemed like minor hesitations or ordinary human behavior may have been moments of high stakes, calculated responses, or unspoken signals. And yet, contradictions emerge. The official investigation concluded the crash was an accident. CCTV footage, forensic reports, and public statements reinforced that narrative. But Camilla's perspective, coupled with her confession, challenges those conclusions. Could someone have been manipulating events from behind the scenes? Were there pressures applied, decisions made, or warnings ignored that night? The public has been told one story. Camilla, allegedly, knows another. And the tension between these narratives is what keeps people riveted. We also have to consider her emotional state during those weeks. Observing Diana, knowing secrets, and allegedly carrying a burden of complicity creates a psychological landscape fraught with stress, guilt, and fear. Every decision is loaded. Every glance carries consequence. And when the night of the crash arrived, the culmination of months of observation, understanding, and anxiety reached a critical point. To Camilla, every interaction mattered, every movement could be pivotal, and every decision could result in irreversible tragedy. Think about the driver. Think about the route. Think about the presence or absence of photographers. Each element has been analyzed millions of times in public discourse. But Camilla's alleged insight adds a hidden layer. She allegedly understood how small actions, like delays, sudden route changes, or unnoticed behaviors, could have devastating consequences. And she allegedly observed these things in real time, aware of their potential ramifications. Here's the chilling part. Those observations weren't just passive. They implied knowledge, involvement, or at least awareness of forces acting behind the scenes. Camilla's perspective hints at orchestration, planning, calculations that went beyond the casual oversight of a driver or the randomness of paparazzi pursuit. And if true, it reframes the narrative of that night entirely, transforming it from tragic accident into a story layered with suspicion, human error, and possible manipulation. And what about the aftermath? Camilla allegedly saw the immediate responses, the panic, the coordination of medical personnel, the scrambling of the palace, and the careful management of media narratives. She observed the tension between appearance and reality, between what the public was allowed to see and what insiders knew. Every delay, every miscommunication, every carefully crafted statement added weight to her understanding of the night's complexity. Now ask yourself, how often do we fully comprehend the chain of events in a tragedy? How often do we consider what someone else might have seen, known, or even influenced? Camilla allegedly had that comprehension. She observed not only the crash, but the entire orchestration of events, from Diana's movements earlier in the evening